Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from Annie News. Now, let's not get confused. This is not this week's episode of MUSHOKU Tensei. My God, what an emotional episode that was. I cried so much. But I'll leave that until the next one. Very intrigued to see what's left out of this. But this is like how Roxy survived for so long within the labyrinth before Rudy came in and saved her. And she started crushing real hard, and I think I think Rudy was the only one that didn't notice. Everyone else like, oh yeah, you got a second wife coming along, boom, 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 which I hope does not happen, because goddamn, don't follow in Paul's footsteps. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's see what's left out. Let's see how Roxy actually managed to survive within the labyrinth.
How was it that Roxy survived in the labyrinth for so long?
I don't know. Let's find out.
Well, we only saw very little of what she actually went through, but a large part of it was a safe zone she managed to constantly find her way back to.
Oh, okay, cool. I mean, yeah, that would be quite kind of boring to show in the way the anime is, but
It was a grueling struggle in which the more she tried to escape, the harder the journey became and the closer to despair she got.
Right.
The way she survived wasn't so much about the survival itself, though, but rather the way in which she overcame it. What I mean is that, as a lone mage in an extremely desperate situation, the mental part of it was just as important as the physical. Seeing her come to terms with what seemed like imminent death really highlighted some parts of Roxy we haven't yet seen before. And that's the parts I want to share with you today.
Cool.
So, as we go through how it is Roxy survived in the labyrinth, you'll get to see more this determined part of her that's intent on living. If we're gonna understand exactly what it is Roxy went through, then it's important to set the stage for where exactly she found herself. You see, this area here was actually one of two places she constantly found herself coming back to.
Right.
The other was a small room which acted as her safe zone, and both were constant in an endless loop where escape was impossible.
So she had a bunker where she could hide, and the monster's den. So, because obviously you're not just going to stay in one spot, you're going to try and figure out how to get out.
In fact, if Roxy was to make it back to the main path where everyone else was, she would first have to traverse over 30 one-way teleporters in perfect order without messing up once.
God.
It was pretty much like winning 30 coin flips in a row.
Damn.
Perhaps even harder since some rooms had more than one teleporter in them. That being the case, to say she was trapped was more like an understatement. And it all happened due to one simple misstep. She was evading an attack directed straight towards her, and right as she stepped back in order to do so, she clumsily tripped and landed right onto a magic circle.
Damn.
It was a rookie mistake since she'd even reviewed where all the traps were beforehand.
God damn,
This brought her to a den filled with...
That would have really pissed me off. If I had researched that hard to know where everything was, and then I just messed up like that. I'd be like, no, you freaking idiot!
monsters, and it was actually the same one we saw her fighting in at the end of last
Testicle
episode.
of things.
You may be wondering how she was there for an entire month, but I promise it'll all make sense once you understand the loop part of everything.
Right.
So, while yes, where she was teleported and where she was found was one and the same, it's not exactly where she spent all her time. She was able to clear the initial wave that was waiting for her, then right as the next batch teleported in, she noticed one of the 6 teleporters around her wasn't being used by them.
Ah.
This made her wonder if monsters weren't at the other side of it, and sure enough, her assumption was right. So, after fighting her way over and teleporting again, what Roxy found on the other side was a small, cramped area just tall enough for her to stand up in and only long enough for 1 or 2 people to lie down in. It was an enclosed space where the only other thing present was a single teleporter. A mini bunker too small for monsters to teleport into, and one in which she would remain safe so long as she stayed. The teleporter next to her was one of the random ones, so this meant it could take her anywhere. Whether it be a den full of monsters or another narrow passageway, finding out was a risk that meant accepting that same danger of before all over again. Luckily, she could recoup her mana and rest without worry, but if she wanted to escape, this was the only way out. Now, mana and water were the things that she had an abundant supply of, but food was the one provision which was limited. She did pack enough to survive more than a few days, but just surviving wasn't what she had planned for
That looks so freaking tasty. Anime food. Every time. Makes me so freaking hungry.
herself. No, Roxy was very intent on escaping. As much as she wanted to think Paul and the others were coming to save her, there was a whole plethora of reasons why they couldn't. And it was that realization that helped her to steel her resolve and continue forward.
Well,
So,
you're in the teleportation labyrinth, like, where the teleportations are completely random. How is anyone meant to, like, know how to get to you? You've got to try and figure... Yeah.
after spending a day in the bunker, Roxy would take her chances with random teleportation and commence the loop which she would cycle through over and over again. She would find herself in an unfamiliar passageway, hop on whatever one-way teleporters seem safe, then mark every area to the best of her ability.
Cool.
Of course, as it is when dealing with this labyrinth, it was impossible to get your bearings no matter how skilled you were. Eventually, the journey would always just devolve into hopping on a teleporter and hoping to see something different. Unfortunately, Roxy wasn't so lucky, and it was after teleporting over and over again that she would once again be faced with the horde of monsters in the same den from last time. She immediately recognized the unused teleporter at the back, then fought her way to safety just as she did before, bringing her right back to the bunker where she was however many hours or days ago. Roxy would then rest another day and venture out again, only to repeat the same process and end up right back here. It seemed whatever route of teleporters she took, they would always lead back to the den and subsequently this small little bunker, resulting in an endless loop that got harder the more times she did it. So, as her body became exhausted and her food supplies low, eventually she had to start eating monster meat. The thing about these types of monsters though was that their flesh was so incredibly toxic, the only way to eat them was to first detoxify them. This was how Roxy took care of her food problems, and it was to say the least taking its toll on her. What worried her more than the hunger, the tiredness, and the overall sense of dread though was the thought of having to go back through the teleporter and do it all over again. You see, knowing what it was that awaited her on the outside was finally starting to make Roxy feel like she couldn't do it anymore. I mean, these were by no means your average monsters. They were intelligent to the point that they could coordinate and work together, so it was just a matter of time until they would adapt and find a way to beat Roxy. Especially if she kept approaching and escaping the exact same way she did the last 5 or 10 times. A month of on and off combat was ample time for any opponent to adapt. So, because Roxy knew her enemies were waiting and learning, she was terrified by the thought of finally being overcome by them. She knew they knew that she was trapped, and it was for that reason that she felt like death was right around the corner for her.
Well, after so
It was
long.
a terrible feeling that shook her all the way down to her core. Yes, time and time again she'd seen adventurers meet their end, yet no matter how much that reminded her her fate was going to be the same, she still
Never
found herself
think it's
frightened
gonna
by
be
the
you,
thought of
dude.
being on its doorstep. As much as she wanted to think that she was prepared for it, there was still so much more that she wanted to do with her life. Dreams that filled her with regret for not having achieved them yet. She still wanted to teach despite having no talent for it, and she still wanted to fall in love despite thinking she wasn't the most appealing.
Oh, bless.
That's why after she'd finished saving Zenith, she was planning to go back to the university and become a professor there. She'd reacquaint herself with the master she had a falling out with, then perhaps find a person she could fall in love with.
Bless.
It was nothing more than a simple happiness she'd always envisioned for herself.
It's so obvious that she's like starting to crush on Rudy, isn't it? And everybody saw it.
But now that death
He
was
just sees her as such a mentor that he doesn't think it's a possibility whatsoever.
only 1 or 2 teleportation circles away, the only thing Roxy could think of was how her dreams won't come true anymore. She could only imagine just how terrible her death was going to be, and that brought with it a slippery slope straight into despair. Even so, it's because she didn't want to die and really wanted to live that Roxy would muster up the courage to get up and leave her bunker again. She would step foot back into that teleportation circle and continue traversing that same unfamiliar passageway she'd come through all those times before. A few new circles would then lead her right back to where she expected, and once again Roxy would be face to face with that same den of monsters. This time things were a little bit different though, since now that Roxy had been here almost 10 times, the monsters knew how it was she was getting away from them. They identified the teleporter she kept using to escape, then used the corpses of the monsters she slaughtered to block her access to it.
Whoa.
The hundreds of monsters she wiped out on all her previous trips were now piled into a mountain, creating this impassable barricade.
So clever.
So, if Roxy wanted to escape this time, not only would she have to kill all the monsters currently present, but she would also have to remove the wall of corpses currently blocking her exit. It was a near impossible task given the army-like formation the monsters were operating with. Remember how I said these monsters were intelligent? Well, aside from being smart enough to block Roxy's exit, they were also coordinated enough to prepare this incredible siege. They had put iron crawlers in the front to act as defense, the spiders behind to provide offensive support, then the mudskulls in the back for that long-range damage.
Right, so there's reason for the formation. God damn! God damn!
It was impeccable organization only possible on this floor of the labyrinth. All this still wouldn't have been enough to take out Roxy, but because more monsters kept teleporting in, there wasn't enough time to recoup, let alone make progress on the barricade. The monsters had made it so that there was no escaping back to her bunker this time. That's when Roxy would start to get overwhelmed, and shortly after would come the part where her life would flash before her eyes. It was a genuinely interesting moment that shed a bit of light into who she is and what she perceives as the core memories in her life. A deeper look into the defining moments of her character and how she feels about them. So, the first would be the disappointment of her parents, and this was when they first realized that she couldn't communicate like them.
Oh, yeah,
they did eventually teach her how to speak,
thing,
but
yeah.
to her she felt they only did so out of pity. It was a bit later that a traveling magician would leave a deep impression on her, and this was what would spark her interest in magic. So, eventually she would learn how to use basic tier water magic, then leave the village and join her first adventurer party. The four of them would travel together for years, but as soon as one ended up dying, the rest would disband and Roxy would go to the central continent. It was here she would enroll into the University of Magic and for the first time be exposed to a school environment. It was a whole new experience she'd never known before, yet one she became quite fond of since things were nice. Her grades were good and she was perceived as talented, but more than anything she'd developed an ego. You see, after finding her master and learning Saint tier water magic, the speed in which she picked it up led to her thinking she was amazing.
Right.
Her master would then complain about how prideful she was, and that wasn't something Roxy was particularly fond of. So she would leave after graduating without saying anything, then set out for Asura and try to find work. What she thought would be incredibly easy, though, instead turned out to be quite the opposite. As it turns out, for whatever reason, a mage like her just wasn't employable. She would then be forced to move out to the countryside, but even there still no one wanted to hire her. That's when she would spot the ad for a home tutor in Fatoa, and just like that, Roxy would be introduced to Rudy.
Right.
A period in time in which she would be humbled by Rudy's own talent. It definitely did create this growing sense of envy, but at the same time, his own modest behavior made her respect him. It was after that she would head to Shirane, explore labyrinths just on the outskirts, then teach Pax to no success whatsoever.
Oh.
It was an experience that showed her just how bad she was at teaching, while at the same time highlighted just how amazing Rudy was. Then, once her job became too disgusting to bear, she immediately left and met up with Alina Lise and Talhand, a result of finding out about the displacement incident. The three would then travel to the Demon Continent, meet up with Roxy's parents where she could confirm that they really did love her, then encounter Kashirika and find out about Zenith. These were the memories Roxy recounted all in this instant, and they reminded her even more of why she wanted to live. So, as she thought relentlessly about how she didn't want to die, the last thing she would think of was actually of how she wouldn't be able to see her parents anymore. It's what I assume is the biggest regret of her life, since in her final moments it's what her mind came to first. Of course, that's when Rudy would come in and save her, and that's how Roxy survived the labyrinth.
Cool.
It wasn't so much this struggle to find resources and survive, but rather this exercise in perseverance and determination. She very well could have spent weeks on end inside her little bunker, but instead chose to venture out and continue fighting. It's an interesting tale of survival that I think tells a lot about Roxy, one that I felt deserved its own video. Luckily, the cut content from last episode wasn't actually very much, but there is one thing that I feel is worth mentioning. It's that Rudy didn't actually know how he figured out where Roxy was. Yes, he did mention how he smelled her, but that feeling of imminent danger which he also felt alongside it was something more than just intuition. Had he not felt that she was in danger like the way he did, then he wouldn't have torn down wall after wall to get to her, and by the time he found her, he would have been too late. It was a case of convenient timing that Rudy couldn't just consider lucky. Perhaps it was in fact the bond he'd made with her, or perhaps it was something more like the man god intervening. Either way, whether Roxy or the man god, it was for sure some sort of divine intervention. But yeah, that's how Roxy survived and was saved.
Sweet.
I hope you enjoyed hearing more about her, and
did.
I hope you'll join me next week for the big battle that we all know is coming.
I don't. Like, come on. What?
Until
I mean, I've seen it already, though. But, I can't wait to see what... I cried so much at the end of
then,
that
though,
episode.
don't forget to check out the new drops at mugenproject.com and pre-order yours if you want to secure one. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time.
Ciao. Goddamn. Cool. So, yeah, very interesting to see the fact that, Roxy was there for a month, and it's like, it wasn't just her just being like, bam, 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 get back, bam, 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 get back. It was like a struggle, and like, she was trying to figure stuff out, but it was just impossible, and she had the tactics, and like, very cool. Very, very cool. And, I reckon the next one's gonna be upsetting for what's cut. But, no spoilers, no spoilers. Thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video, and want to be able to watch patron-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series, link in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all I ask to help support channels. Greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. Thank you all for watching. Oh, join button. Be a member. See my videos early. Yes. What do you guys think of that? You guys think of this? Click like, subscribe, or anything. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys later, guys. Nick Dam. Bye.